Good morning, good afternoon. I'm chairing this session. So the next speaker will be Dr. Khamis. We are swapping the two speakers. He will talk on education and sustainable development, building on cultural assets and partnerships. I would please ask you if you've got any questions for him, would you add it in the chat? So we're looking forward to his presentation. Thank you.
Morning, so I can start?
Yes, please do.
Okay, good morning everybody from Nairobi, Kenya. We're a few hours behind Hong Kong, but it's a pleasure to be here today. I've participated in the previous session as well, and I think a lot of what I'm going to say builds on some of the aspects of intersectionality, interculturality, and where people actually live and interact with each other. So this work builds on about 30 years of work that we have been doing as part of the Aga Khan Development Network, of which I'm a member of the Aga Khan University, which is the first international multi-chartered university that began in Pakistan, South Asia 40 years ago, and works in Afghanistan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, the United Kingdom, and the former Central Asian republics of Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. I'm just going to take a couple of examples today in terms of the cultural assets and how we build on those as we move forward in a time which we call the Anthropocene. So this is the outline. I'll be speaking very quickly to the background in terms of how did we get to where we are today, the role of education and development, what we can do to build on cultural aspects and assets to navigate human diversity, and finally, how do we reflect on sustainability as we all work towards actualizing the Sustainable Development Goals. So how did we get here? The United Nations Development Programme in 2020 said that humanity as a whole, for the first time in human history, has entered what we call the age of the Anthropocene. And the age of the Anthropocene is when, for the first time, we as human beings have more of an effect on the biosphere, that is the Earth as a whole, than the processes of the Earth have on the way humanity lives life. So today we know from Oxfam, the report that was released just a little while ago, that 1% of humanity owns and consumes more than 50% of humanity, which lives mostly in the global south. We have seen degradation, we have seen deforestation, we have seen shrinking of wildlife reserves, encroachment of humanity, etc., etc. And so we very clearly now know that the world is divided, that there are clearly differences in how we think of a human being depending on where that human being lives or has been born in. And we know that today education, the way we have it as formal state-sponsored education, is really not meeting the needs of human development holistically. So we are at a point of reckoning. So when we look at the global and the national and then the local aspects, we see that education has an instrumental function. That is that it tries to sustain a nation-state model, which itself is a creation of the post-Enlightenment European project, and then through colonization, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and to some extent Latin America, we find that there are clearly children that are not learning. And when we see that they are not learning, we see that education functions also to reproduce inequalities, and we see very many divisions and these divisions articulate with diversity. Well, that's the rhetoric, that's the narrative. But if we start to disaggregate and we start to look at actual functioning of knowledge as opposed to schooling, we find that in Tanzania, for example, children can read and function in the national language Kiswahili very well, as opposed to English, which on reflection is not, is not surprising. However, the modus of English language, the hegemonic determination of a Western-centric model of an educated person, means that those who are not Western-centric, of course, are seen as uneducated. And this is the international discourse. And so we have to challenge the whole idea of education and development as a function. In doing that, we find that when we look at the needs of humanity and we look at cultural assets, then things start to become very, very different. If you turn your attention to the right, this is an 800-year-old fort in what is called the third polar of the world. These are the Himalayan mountain ranges in northern Pakistan, bordering Central Asia to the north, China to the east, India to the east and the south, and then Afghanistan to the west. These are people that have been living here with their own ways of life for hundreds of years. And what we find is that high mountain societies have very, very different ideas about what it means to live in, if you like, a relationship with nature. They live in fragile environments. They know how to live in those fragile environments. So the fort that was rehabilitated, as one of the previous speakers in the Korean example was telling us in the last session, is about multi-sectorality. So you cannot rehabilitate a fort in the high mountains at 2,500 meter elevation unless you take the lives of those people, unless you bring modern technology, unless you look at infrastructure, but then you look at livelihoods, sustainability, and economic activity. So this rehabilitation has led to clear cross-technological transfer on the one hand, as well as improvement of livelihoods using things like improvement of infrastructure, getting products to markets. This is a very rich agricultural society, and with modern step farming over the last 40 years has increased yields dramatically. But it had to happen holistically in a people-centric way. The image to the left of the screen is Cairo, Egypt. And Cairo is a mega city. And this was a park that was created by the Aga Khan Development Network in the middle of the city on a dump, a garbage dump that was over 500 years old. So stewardship of the environment, which is both a sustainable development goals as well as the climate agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement, and an understanding that we necessarily need green spaces in order to live in livable humanity structures, in this case, a city. As excavation happened in this park, it was noticed that there were cultural heritages. This is called the Dar al-Hamar in Egypt, and was the site of the ancient Muslim empire there. When those cultural artifacts were excavated, the community got involved and started to actually donate their time. So this is called the green lung of Cairo. Again, a cultural asset, which is a lived environment, plus material assets from history, empowered people to take care of their environment, linking that to the Sustainable Development Goals. The image at the top is Rakaposhi Peak, which is, I believe, in the top 6 highest peaks of the world. This is where the Baltic Fort is situated. And we have just learned a few days ago that 50% of glaciers of the world will actually disappear by 2050 unless action is taken. So how people live, their cultural heritages, their built environment, and the care for the biosphere must necessarily go together. And this then must necessarily inform education. So today we know that Afghanistan is in quite a turmoil, but at the breakup of the Soviet Union, Tajikistan, which is just north of Afghanistan, had a high level of human resource capacity, in this case, doctors. But Afghanistan had a high number of patients. So creating e-health using modern technology, but the cultural assets of these people, that is their language, that is their infrastructure, that is their built environment, that is their understanding of how they live in high mountain societies, we now see movement and improvement of healthcare in these high mountain societies as a practical example of how to build on linguistic, culture, values in order to improve health, in this case, SDG 3. So as we move forward, we must move away from an understanding that GDP is not the end all and the be all of human development, that we must necessarily look at what makes humanity humanity. What is it that we understand as our social and cultural strengths, and how do we build on those? I'll just take an example of Daniel Wagner, who's the UNESCO Chair of Literacy and Learning today. His foundational work in Morocco showed that children who learned Arabic in early childhood were actually able to transfer those skills linguistically to other languages, whether this was a national language, whether this was an international language such as French or English. And we must actually measure what is important to people. In this case, Kiswahili or Arabic, for example, for religious practices or cultural practices. And that then actually adds to human strength through diversity of how we live in our environment. So as I complete my presentation, we know that we are going to have very important existential threats that are coming our way. The Pakistan floods, in which a third of the country was inundated, 27 million children out of school. We know that the most affected have the least capability to confront these challenges. And in order to do that, we must actually look at what it is they value and they understand and they feel is critical. And not just follow what we think of as good education through state-sponsored formal schooling at the behest of governments and international bodies in the idea that apparently this gives us development, but actually reflect on what we mean by sustainability. Yes, there are huge challenges with the digital ecosystem, with nanotechnology, and there are great inequalities today. So there is a dilemma which we must navigate, which is being sensitive to cultural diversity on the one hand, and meeting challenges which are necessarily national, international, global, such as the climate change crisis that we have today. With that, I thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm very impressed with your presentation. It was really interesting. I would like urge everyone, if they have a question, that they will please post it in the chat, that we can talk to him and ask him a question. I would like to just confirm if the next speaker is available. The next speaker is Elisabetta. There's no questions at this stage, but I would like to ask you a question or two. Can I do that?
Of course, please.
Yeah, okay. So the first question that I would like to ask, I'm in South Africa and I've got the same dilemma with the language. The learners have to learn their own mother tongue and then move to English, and it's not always easy. And then the final exam, they need to write in English. So you make a statement, measure what is important to the people and add to their strengths. How would you measure that? How will you determine what is important for them? Even though I tell you that mother tongue is really important, the parents still do feel that the English, I'm now taking this example, English is the economic language and the kids need to learn English. But you and I know that it's actually much better for them to learn in their mother tongue, but the parents feel that is not important to them, even though we are different. Well, how would you measure? How would you go about to identify in the community what do they think is really important?
Thank you, Dr. Jordaan. I think that's a very, very important question, which has two aspects. One is that we have a formal state educational system that privileges English, and English as a global language is the language of commerce, is the language of the economy, etc. So having said that, I did studies across the Horn of Africa, in Somalia, in West Africa, in Chad, throughout the 22 countries of Western Africa, and even in East Africa. And if you actually look at the grassroots reality, and I'll take the example of Muslim communities in this case, because these are majority Muslim communities, as is the case of Afghanistan and northern Pakistan. Whilst they aspire to their children having an economic skill, in this case, the English language, they at the same time concurrently are building their cultural assets. In this case, Arabic, for example. So the school system actually divides learning between formal in school and out of school. And government policy then reinforces this on what I would state is a false rhetoric of what people actually want. So in the case of Somalia, Chad, West Africa, we find the development of what we are calling hybrid schools. And the case of the Philippines is extremely interesting right now. I know we've got some people from Manila in the last session. And so if we look at Mindanao, for example, today, which now has a separate organic law for the Muslims or the people of Mindanao in the south, we find the rise of hybrid schools, which are actually looking at what people want. So the idea of what you measure is based on a people-centric system design, not a state-sponsored industrial design that is a colonial, post-colonial nation-state project. I hope that responds adequately to your question, which is very, very critical and very important.
And the next question I also have, I would urge people to please ask questions, but I still have a question. The other one is about sensitive culture diversity, and that's a very difficult one, to be sensitive and culture and diverse. Would you elaborate a little bit on that statement that you made? That is really difficult to also, how would you go about if I need to be sensitive and cultural diverse? How would you go about that? Is there any suggestions that you have for me?
Well, so the basic bottom line is that we have to be open-minded on things that we don't understand. And we necessarily are, as human beings, learners. Prima facie, that's what we do. We're a learning organization, an organism, and an approach. So let me give you an example. We know that consumption of meat, particularly cows, is one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases. and that is creating a climate catastrophe, which we're in today. Having said that, we are also confronted with non-communicable diseases at an unprecedented rate. And one of the reasons, apparently, is because of our diet. So we have a people called the Hasda in northern Tanzania. And these people have the most diverse microbiome in the world, apparently. A microbiome is how your gut is sensitive to what it eats and how that then creates and supports your health as a full organism. So one of the reasons they have the most diverse microbiome is because they eat any source of protein that is available. So this could be insects, this could be porcupines, this could be anything that is out there. And we have these ideas about clean and unclean. Food, for example, which is sacred, that we can eat, and profane, which we stay away from. So if we now understand that their diversity is actually a result of their nomadic lifestyle, which is effectively understanding how to live in their environment, if we can keep that open-ended mind there, I'm not asking everybody to eat insects and stop eating beef. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that if we understand their diversity from a physical and a physiological point of view, we can understand human health in a much better, more profound way, and then can extend that to culture, to art, to ideas of beauty, to understanding how the human mind perceives and lives in an equilibrium manner with our resources that are available.
Thank you very, very much for a very interesting talk. And I'm very, would you let me think a little bit? I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Elisabetta Magnani from Australia. And she will discuss the following: fostering student empowerment to address global challenges. So we're looking forward to a presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and thank you for the presentation by Professor Khamis. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully we have time for some exchange at the end of this session. So yes, I start straight away. This is a presentation is to report and to discuss and to reflect on the creation of a new third-year unit. So these are senior undergraduate students, which I was asked to redesign centered around global challenges. And the challenge I was facing was low engagement by these business school students, third-year business school students. And I thought that by presenting a series of discussions about global challenges and by designing assessments centered around empowering the students, I was aiming to engage with them and getting better results in terms of their ability to empathize with the fellow students to solve global challenges. So this is a little bit the sort of summary of what the unit was about, but I want to tell you a little bit more about the motivation behind the design of this unit. And I'm a university educator. I've been an university educator for a long time. And I remember the Amartya Sen, 1998, a Nobel Prize in Economics, who wrote in 2009, immediately after the global financial crisis. And he was discussing and he was concerned about the kind of education we provide students with. And the question he was asking was the kind of economics that we should teach in light of the present economic crisis back in 2008, 2009. We are talking about the global financial crisis. How do we assess what is taught and championed among academic economists as a guide to economic policy? So this question was posed after the global financial crisis. I believe that it couldn't be a more punctual question given the emergencies and polycrises, as we call them these days, that we are currently facing, from the climate change to the ecological disaster to extreme inequality and so on. So that was a little bit, I was inspired by Amartya Sen, who posed this poignant question back in 2009 to structure the new unit called the Asian Business Environment. So it's a business unit in three parts. Part one provides us some theoretical insights about global challenges. Part two aims to apply these theoretical insights into understanding 4 key Asian countries: China, India, Japan, and Vietnam. In part three, I return to some broad discussions about the nature of these global challenges and what we can do to address those. Now, a little bit about the audience before I tell you a little bit more about this experience. These are about 150 students, senior undergraduate students. About 50% of them are located outside of Australia. And so they Zoom to the lectures and access material online. About 70% of these 150 students are majoring in something that is not economics, rather can be international business, most of them. Others are majoring in economics or applied finance or marketing, but all these students usually have no more than one economics unit. So although it is an economics unit, it really needs to be broad and to solicit the use of basic economics to address these global challenges. So before I tell you a little bit more about the method, of course, we have many global challenges at the moment. Here on the left-hand side, you see about 15 global challenges. You can probably add quite a few more. So the first effort was to boil down to only a handful that I could discuss in the context of 13 weeks. And I thought that mapping these 15 global challenges into 5 was already quite an effort. So I chose the demographic global challenge, the ecology and energy global challenge, including climate change, labor and inequality global challenge, global modes of production challenge, and the technological global challenge. And in order to do that, I wanted to have to support this choice by going back to 3 critical crises that return in the context of contemporary forms of capitalism and capitalist organization, namely the production crisis, the reproduction crisis, and the ecological crisis. So I wanted to give students a sort of critical approach to the economic organization they're familiar with in different forms. Of course, capitalism is not one system, but many systems, and we have to be open to the differentiation of economic and political organization. But in addressing these 5 global challenges and related to the organization of capitalist organization in different countries, in different national realities. I really wanted to give voice to Basu. Professor Basu wrote in 2001, again reproposed a question that's similar to Amartya Sen back in 2009. What kind of economics do we need to address these global challenges? And Professor Basu answers, more than ever, there is the need today to take a holistic, multidisciplinary view to approach what is happening around us. So my inner dialogue was really with respect to this giant of the economic profession and to others that I was reading along the way. I was also compelled to give students a critical view of the economics that they learn in business schools in Australia these days. And in order to do so, I had to make sure that this economics is accessible. So what the best is to repropose the circular flow that you see in blue in the left-hand side of this slide, and to repropose it in a critical way to make sure that the students understand that this, basic tool of learning how the economy works actually neglects key points of and key elements of capitalist production in these days. What are these key points? Social inequality, unpaid care economy, the natural resources and the ecological system, that it's all around the circular flow, but we often neglect. In addressing these global challenges, I really wanted the students to reflect on their national and subnational reality, because empowering students by giving them simply some theoretical insights about where these global challenges are coming from seemed to me quite a poor way to empower them. So in order to empower them, I wanted them to ask key questions. What social and labor issues today in my own reality? What are the key actors that contribute in some way, are affected by these global challenges? What are the key institutions in my own national and subnational reality, and what are the key lessons that the students can learn about addressing these global challenges? So the best way I thought was to take some national realities such as India, Vietnam, and Japan, and China, and invite them to reflect on what was in common among these 4 challenges, among these 4 countries, in terms of our global challenges. And there are a couple of things that are in common. So capitalism has developed in the contemporary times by amassing humanity, millions of people who are dispossessed, marginalized, and prevented from participating in the global economy. Others have been involved in the global economy, but often in precarious and highly exploitative modes of engagement. And I wanted the students to reflect on these broad trends and really reflect on the experience, the knowledge, the local knowledge they have. So this is an example of Vietnam, where we see technological global challenge, where these huge platforms such as Uber, for example, operates by employing younger people. You can see them in the photos, often in a precarious employing arrangement with a very little perspective for careers and these kind of things. Okay, so what do I do in part 3? In part 3, I propose some quite innovative ways to think about responding to this global challenge. For example, Danny Roderick and Stephanie Stancheva published in 2021 about fixing capitalism. And what they offer is a view on technology change, indicating that it might be possible to direct technology to better serve the existing workers' need, in addition to preparing the workforce to match the requirement of technology. What do they mean is an approach to technology change that avoids taking a technology change as exogenous, as something that just falls from the sky, randomly distributed in different local developments, and try to think a little bit what are the challenges to meet that we have in the local and national and subnational realities. How can we adopt technology change by taking into account the labor condition, the social conditions, and the the challenges of training these workers so that they don't become victims of technological change. So I introduce the reading by Samuel Bowles and Carlin, again in 2021, and these authors propose a new political economy paradigm where the civil society becomes central to balance out the role of government and the role of markets. The civil society that brings in values and practices and norms such as reciprocity, altruism, fairness, sustainability, dignity, identity, and balancing out not only to propose values that are important for the implementation of policy, but also to create and enforce synergies between government and markets. So this is the synergies complex that the two authors propose. So how do I empower, how do I ask students to reflect on their local reality, on these global challenges, on new modes to tackle global challenges? By means of a public awareness campaign the students have to design. And in designing the public awareness campaign, directed to a specific aspect of one particular global challenge. They have to be quite specific about the global challenge that they want to address, the key actors, the key audience they mean to attract, the key call for action that the public awareness campaign aims to solicit. And I want them to reflect on a broad set of stakeholders, including those who may actually find progress in this particular aspect of the global challenge quite antagonistic. So by doing so, I aim to introduce, to ask students to be applying a critical spirit, a critical thinking, and reflect in a kind of applied way. This is a little bit the feedback I've got from students, and I'm hopeful that it's quite a different way for me to teach economics, and I enjoyed it very much. I really enjoyed the opportunity to solicit action, not only knowledge, but knowledge for action towards the solution of these global challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisabetta. I'm very impressed, and I'm so happy you included reflection as part of your assessment, because I think it's really important. And I'm really impressed that it's not only economic students doing this. So I'm going to ask everyone to please contact. We are really running over time and we are behind with the program. If we can rather contact Elisabetta directly on the web, or contact details is there, and then ask her about this interesting course. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day today further. Thank you. Bye-bye.